The Alps didn't bow to Roman might, they forced the empire to adapt. Rather than fighting the mountains, the Romans learned to move with them. Their secret weapon? Taking their time. Let's trace the deliberate footsteps of history's most patient conquerors. Picture yourself as a Roman soldier staring up at those peaks. The snowcaps never melt, the winds never stop howling, and the path ahead disappears into the clouds. Other empires would break against these mountains or rush through with disastrous results. Remember Hannibal? His famous elephant crossing cost him nearly half his army and most of his war animals before he even reached Italy. Carthage tried to brute force nature and lost. The Romans learned from others' mistakes. They understood something fundamental. About moving through mountains, haste kills more soldiers than enemy spears. Alpine passes don't care about imperial deadlines. A trader might take 3 weeks just to travel between modern-day Switzerland and northern Italy. That's slower than walking speed, but for good reason. Avalanches bury entire caravans. Sudden storms freeze men where they stand. The quickest routes often lead straight to cliffs. So Rome took the long view literally. Their scouts spent years mapping seasonal weather patterns, noting when passes became impassable, tracing routes where pack animals wouldn't break their legs. The military engineer Vitruvius wrote that Alpine roads required not construction, but negotiation with the terrain. You see it in their choice to build winding paths along gentle slopes rather than hacking shortcuts through rock faces. Why? Because every hour spent carving stone was one less hour lost retrieving corpses from ravines. This wasn't weakness, it was cold calculation. Secure supply lines mattered more than surprise attacks. A legion that arrived intact could hold territory indefinitely. Compare that to Pompey's chaotic retreat through these same mountains during Caesar's civil war, where hurried marches and poor planning turned into starving soldiers eating their own pack mules. The Romans who succeeded treated the Alps like a stubborn ally rather than an enemy to defeat. Mountain tribes knew this instinctively. Local guides received regular pay from Rome, not just to lead caravans, but to confirm whether routes remained safe after spring melts or autumn rains. In some areas, the army stationed full-time maintenance crews solely to clear landslides before. They choked off entire valleys. There's a reason these alpine communities survived for centuries. Adaptation beats force when gravity fights against you. The most telling evidence sits in a place called the Via Claudia Augusta. Originally a narrow Celtic track, Rome transformed it into a highway by adding retaining walls that redirected avalanche paths, bridges that avoided flood zones, and way stations precisely one day's slow march apart. Modern engineers still use segments of it because the grading holds up. That's the Roman Alpine strategy in stone-patient adjustments that outlasted empires. Traders adopted the same approach. Shipments of Spanish olive oil or Gallic wine didn't race through passes. They inched along in small, manageable loads. Breakages plummeted when mule trains stopped trying to cover more than 8 miles a day. The extra time also let merchants barter with highland villages, turning what could have been bandit attacks into profitable trade networks. Military records from the era show that Alpine-bound legions carried double the usual rations, yet still ran low near summits. One dispatch from 15 BCE notes soldiers burning their own shields just to melt snow for drinking water. Disaster avoided in later campaigns by stricter pacing. By Augustus' reign, the army scheduled Alpine crossings exclusively between June and September, accepting that winter campaigns weren't worth the cost. What fascinates isn't just that Rome succeeded, but how they redefined success. The measure wasn't speed, it was reliability. An iron ingot from Noricum could take a month to reach the Po Valley, yet still arrive sooner than Carthaginian silver lost in some crevasse. That predictability became Rome's real advantage. While others gambled on dramatic Alpine crossings, the empire methodically turned the mountains into a slow but steady conveyor belt, moving troops, goods, and even ideas. Speaking of moving things, let's talk about how they built roads that didn't wash away. Roman roads in the Alps didn't just happen. They were calculated layers of stone and strategy. The first step was always the roughest. Workers would clear a path wide enough for 2 carts to pass and dig down several feet to reach stable ground. This trench wasn't just a hole. It was the foundation for everything to come. They'd line it with fist-sized rocks called the stadamen, irregular chunks wedged together like puzzle pieces. Think of it as shock absorbers for chariots. Above this went the pavimentum, a mix of smaller gravel and lime mortar that hardened into concrete over time. Roman engineers knew water was the real enemy in the mountains. Every Alpine road had drainage built into its bones. Crews angled the surfaces slightly, so rain and meltwater would run off into side ditches rather than pooling underfoot. Some stretches still drained properly. After 2,000 years, modern asphalt roads often fail faster. The real muscle of these roads came next, the nucleus. This middle layer used crushed stone packed so tightly it could bear the weight of iron-wheeled supply wagons without shifting. Teams would spend days compacting it with hand tools, knowing any soft spots would turn into mud pits come spring. Archaeologists find nails and pottery shards mixed into these layers. Workers tossing trash became accidental time capsules. Finally, the surface stones arrived. These weren't randomly placed slabs, but carefully selected blocks shaped to fit snugly against each other. The best Alpine roads used local granite or limestone, worn smooth by centuries of traffic until they gleamed in sunlight. You can still see the ruts from cartwheels on some preserved sections, grooves worn deep into the rock by countless journeys. Building in the mountains forced innovations. Retaining walls became common where slopes were steep, some 30 feet high and anchored with oak beams. Crews learned to leave gaps in these walls, not for decoration, but to let avalanche snow pass through rather than smashing the structure. Tunnels were rare, but not unknown. The Furlough Pass in Italy still has its original Roman borehole, hacked through solid rock with pickaxes and fire setting. Material choices mattered. Lime mortar from distant kilns mixed with volcanic ash created concrete that set even underwater, crucial for bridges crossing alpine streams. They'd transport this powder in sealed barrels to keep it dry during transit. Paving stones came from nearby quarries whenever possible, but some high-status roads imported marble from hundreds of miles away just for appearance. Local knowledge shaped every route. Roman surveyors would spend weeks interviewing mountain tribes before drawing plans. They learned which valleys flooded first in spring, which passes stayed snow-free longest, where rockfalls were common. One records notes avoiding a valley of echoes after guides warned that sudden noises could trigger slides. The best routes often followed old Celtic trails, but upgraded beyond recognition. A Via Claudia Augusta shows how these systems work together. Starting in northern Italy, it zigzags up the Alps using 60 separate switchbacks rather than taking steep direct paths. Travelers moving at Roman military pace, about 12 miles a day, would reach way stations precisely at day's end. Some still stand as farmhouses today, their thick walls once sheltering soldiers from alpine winds. Maintenance never stopped. Legionaries assigned to road duty weren't punished. It was specialized work. Teams carried specific tools: iron picks for ice breaking, woven willow mats for temporary repairs, even portable forges to sharpen blades on site. Records from Noricum province show crews patrolling in rotating shifts. One group clearing summer growth while another reinforced walls before winter. Bridges reveal Roman priorities. Rather than spanning rivers at their narrowest points, they often chose wider, shallower crossings that wouldn't flood as violently. Stone piers were tapered upstream, like ship prows to split the force of spring. Meltwaters. Wooden versions used removable decking planks taken down each autumn and stored until spring to prevent ice damage. Winter closures were planned, not failures. The army scheduled supply movements between June and September, accepting that some passes stayed blocked 10 months a year. Snow poles marked safe routes, early versions of today's avalanche markers. One account describes scouts probing drifts with 20-foot poles before allowing mule trains to proceed. The slow pace was intentional. Wider roads allowed two-way traffic, but rarely exceeded 8 feet across any broader, and upkeep became impossible. Gradients were kept below 10%, even if it meant longer routes. One alpine section takes 7 miles to climb 2,000 feet via gentle switchbacks. A modern highway does it in 2, but requires constant repairs. Way stations weren't just inns, they were logistics hubs. The Tabula Peutingeria, a Roman road map, shows them spaced a day's march apart. Each kept fodder for 100 mules, replacement wheels, even emergency rations for snowbound travelers. Some had makeshift hospitals amplifying. The empire's reach one weary step at a time, and those steps added up. A single alpine crossing might involve surveyors marking the route with smoke signals, prisoners, or local laborers quarrying stone, mule trains bringing mortar, mix from lowland kilns, military engineers supervising every foot of incline. Eventually, merchants pacing their carts to the empire's rhythm. The real proof isn't in records, but in what remains. Walk sections of the Via Julia Augusta near Nice, and your boots click on the same stones that supported Caesar's troops. The grooves aren't from tourists. They're the cumulative effect of iron-rimmed, wheels rolling at walking speed for 3 centuries. Modern engineers still study these roads when planning mountain highways. The layered design inspired today's pavement standards. Those retaining walls function better than many concrete barriers. Even the Roman seasonal closures mirror how alpine tunnels now shut for maintenance. Slow travel built to last outlasted empires chasing speed. What's surprising isn't that these roads worked. It's how thoroughly they shaped the land. Alpine villages still cluster where Roman way stations stood. Some mountain passes bear names from legionary survey maps. The concrete formulas resurfaced in 20th century dam projects. Every adaptation made for patient movement ended up changing the terrain itself. Next time you see a highway crew fixing potholes, remember the Romans would have patched that spot before the hole formed. Their roads moved slowly because they were built forever. Now consider what happened when people actually traveled these routes day after grinding day. A Roman merchant traveling through the Alps moved slower than a tired ox. While today we'd impatiently tap our fingers at a 2-minute traffic delay, his entire journey measured progress in single-digit miles per day. The Via Claudia Augusta, one of the main Alpine routes, stretched about 350 miles from the Po Valley to Augsburg. Modern hikers completed in a month. Romans took twice as long. Weather dictated everything. Summer travelers might enjoy 10-hour walking days, but autumn rains could cut that to 5. Snow reduced progress to 0, not just because of accumulation, but from the hours spent each morning breaking ice off equipment. One military dispatch mentions troops burning precious lamp oil just to thaw frozen wagon axles. The army scheduled all major crossings between June and September, accepting that attempting passes outside this window wasted more lives than battles did. The daily rhythm followed strict patterns. Caravans would rise at dawn, repack goods that had been stored off the ground to avoid nighttime moisture, and be moving within an hour. Midday stops lasted precisely long enough to water animals and eat cold rations. No fires meant no hot meals until evening. Sunset signaled not just camp, set up, but equipment checks. Leather straps needed oiling, hooves required cleaning, and every wheel got inspected for cracks. These routines consumed hours, but prevented disasters later. Rest stops weren't optional. The Mansionese official way stations were placed every 12 to 15 miles along major routes, matching a legion's expected daily march, more frequent. Mutations offered basic services like fresh mules. Archaeologists find these sites by locating concentrations of animal bones and broken pottery, the leftovers of countless hurried meals. One station near the Brenner Pass still has its stone troughs where handlers would dunk overheated pack animals in cold mountain streams. Social hierarchies inverted on the road. Wealthy merchants traveling with silk shipments slept in the same drafty barracks as army recruits. The Tabula Peutingeria, a Roman road map, marks which stations had superior accommodations, sometimes just meaning they had roofs. At crowded stops, travelers drew lots for sleeping spots near the hearth. Personal servants became invaluable not for prestige, but because they could guard belongings while their masters stood in line for latrines. Letters home often complained about the boredom. Soldiers penned endless complaints about waiting for supply trains. Traders calculated lost profits from delays. One wax tablet found at Vindolanda, though not Alpine, captures the universal frustration. I have sent you socks, and 2 pairs of sandals and 2 pairs of underpants. Even military dispatches show impatience creeping through official reports. The mules are again delayed by swollen rivers. Yet this slowness had advantages. Avalanche zones were crossed at midday, when the snow was softest and least likely to fracture. Steep descents waited until morning, when beasts of burden were freshest. The same trader creeping along at 5 miles per day could reliably predict arrival dates, within a 3-day window valuable for customers waiting in Milan. Modern logistics. Experts would recognize this as just-in-time delivery, first-century style. Supply chains relied on glacial pace. One military tablet from Risha documents a grain shipment taking 47 days from Verona to Salzburg, a distance modern trucks cover in 5 hours. But the document also notes 0 spoilage or loss, something unheard of in faster-moving caravans. The Romans understood that moving 10 tons safely was better than rushing 20 tons and arriving with half ruined. Seasonal workers knew the roads better than any map. Each spring, crews would walk the passes assessing winter damage, often preceding official travelers by weeks. Their reports determined which routes reopened first. Local guides commanded premium, wages not for knowing directions. The roads were obvious, but for intelligence on which springs had gone saline or where bears were digging near the path. Military marshes followed brutal precision. A full legion with baggage train stretched nearly 2 miles end to end. At standard pace, the vanguard would reach the next campsite before the rear had left the previous one. Cooking fires were never permitted until the entire column arrived, meaning latecomers ate cold rations. Medical carts always rode near the front, yet another reason haste was discouraged. The slow drip of people created unexpected communities. Alpine villages near major passes developed specialties catering to predictable traffic patterns. One settlement became known for barrel repairs after so many wine shipments stopped there. Another produced superior snow goggles made from leather and thin slices of smoky quartz. These microeconomies relied entirely on the certainty of slow moving, travelers needing the same services year after year. Relay systems allowed information to outpace people. Couriers carrying official mail switched horses at each mutatio, covering up to 50 miles in a day. But even this fast service moved at walking speed between stations. The system worked because every rider knew exactly where to find fresh. Mounts no time wasted searching. Private messages traveled slower still, often hitching rides with friendly merchants. The weight of goods dictated pace more than distance. Olive oil amphorae traveled faster than glasswares, but slower than raw wool. Metals moved quickest lead from Britannia, iron from Noricum, because their value justified extra mules. 1. Merchant's ledger from Augusta Vindelicum shows lead shipments arriving twice monthly, like clockwork, while luxury items appear sporadically as space permitted on westbound caravans. Weather monitoring became a science. Romans noted that southerly winds often brought storms within 12 hours on certain passes. They timed departures accordingly. Alpine tribes sold forecasting services, some accurate, some less so. The best. Forecasters commanded prices equivalent to a soldier's monthly wages. Their methods went unrecorded, but likely involved observing animal behavior and cloud formations particular to valleys. Night travel was rare, but not unheard of. During emergencies, torch-bearing guides could lead caravans through moonlit passes. The risks were extreme straying. Even slightly off path could send wagons tumbling downhill. More commonly, bright moonlight allowed for early starts, with travelers packing up camp hours before dawn. Soldiers particularly favored this, wanting to cross dangerous stretches in the deceptive quiet of pre-dawn. Children and the elderly rarely attempted full crossings. Families would split at major towns like Tridentum, with some members continuing over the passes, while others waited months for their return. Birth records from Alpine garrisons show concentrated spikes 9 months after winter isolation ended proof that even personal lives adapted to seasonal travel patterns. The cost of speed became brutally clear whenever someone ignored the norms. During the Marcomannic Wars, Marcus Aurelius's generals pushed troops through winter passes to surprise Germanic tribes. Contemporary accounts describe soldiers freezing solid while standing watch, supply carts abandoned where they stuck fast in snow. The victorious army arrived too weakened to fight effectively. Tacitus summarizes the lesson. Nature cannot be ordered like a legion. Religious practices adapted to the crawl. Travelers made offerings at roadside shrines, not just for safe passage, but for patience. One common votive figurine shows a mule with its head bowed likely a ply against stubbornness. Larger stations housed temples where merchants could swear oaths about delivery timelines, knowing the gods understood Alpine realities better than impatient customers. The foods of slow travel became regional staples. Hardtack baked near passes, incorporated ground pine nuts, a local ingredient that kept longer than wheat flour. Alpine cheese gained fame because it couldn't spoil easily. Soldiers carried vinegar-soaked beans that required no cooking. These weren't culinary choices, but adaptations to a world where fresh food might take weeks to arrive. Bandits learned to target predictable flows. Ambush points clustered near places where caravans inevitably slowed sharp turns requiring single-file passage, or the last flat ground before steep climbs. Guards weren't paid to fight, but to deter through visible readiness. Their greatest weapon was to lay bandits avoided well-defended groups because prolonged stackouts burned through their own scarce supplies. The human body itself adjusted. Skeletons from Alpine garrisons show thicker leg bones and spinal adaptations consistent with constant gradual climbing. Comparative studies suggest these men could walk farther with heavy packs than modern infantry, but struggled with sudden bursts of speed. Their physiology matched their environment built for endurance over quickness. Petroglyphs along the routes tell their own story. Unlike the boastful victory monuments in Rome, Alpine carvings often depict simple counting marks, each presumably representing a successful crossing. Some show crude calendars tracking passable months. The most poignant are worn smooth, where generations of hands touched them for luck before attempting the next slow mile. All this creeping progress added up. While individual journeys felt endless, the cumulative effect reshaped continents. That wine amphora taking 40 days to cross. The Brenner Pass linked Mediterranean vineyards to northern goldsmiths. The lead ingot moving at snail's pace from Britannia eventually roofs imperial baths in Constantinople. Every plodding step connected empires. Now meet the people who made these journeys possible, not the famous generals or wealthy merchants, but the ones who kept the passes open in blizzards and repaired bridges in spring floods. The Alpine passes moved goods at the speed of growing grass. A shipment of Spanish olive oil might take 6 months to reach the Rhine frontier longer than it took to produce the oil itself. Yet these slow caravans carried fortunes in their carts. Gold from Noricum traveled in ingots small enough to fit in a soldier's palm, but heavy enough to pay his wages for a year. Each lump bore the stamp of its imperial mine, its value confirmed by the very slowness of its journey. Quicker routes existed, but none as trustworthy. Metals dominated Alpine trade. Iron from modern-day Austria moved in billets shaped like loaves of bread, each wrapped in straw to prevent rust during damp mountain crossings. Lead from Britannia came cast into pigs weighing 80 pounds, the maximum a mule could carry without buckling on steep slopes. Silver followed similar paths, but with armed guards walking alongside. One merchant's ledger from Augusta Vindelicum. Records transporting 200 pounds of silver over the Brenner Pass at a rate of just 15 miles per day. The escort outnumbered the merchants 4 to 1. Luxury items crept along too. Glassware from Alexandria traveled packed in sheep's wool inside wooden crates. Broken pieces found near the Via Claudia show how some crates held as few as 2 delicate cups surrounded by padding. The math was brutal. A single mule could carry 20 crates of grain or 1 carefully padded amphora of perfume. Traders gambled on which would earn more at market. Perishables required ingenuity. Salted fish from the Adriatic arrived edible, because it was repacked in fresh barrels halfway through the journey. Alpine cheese became famous not for taste, but durability. It could survive months on the road without spoiling. Wine presented the trickiest problem. Amphorae from Campania traveled full to prevent sloshing, but their clay stoppers often failed in thin mountain air. The solution? Coat the cork in pine pitch and wrap the neck with damp linen that shrunk tight as it dried. Weather dictated what moved when. Winter saw mostly non-perishable metals and woven goods. Spring brought timber floating down swollen. Rivers on rafts. Summer allowed delicate items like papyrus rolls or medicinal plants. Autumn was for last pushes before snow-closed passes, often frantic races to get one final wool shipment south. A dispatch from Tridentum mentions merchants paying triple rates in October just to hire extra guides before the first frost. Middlemen profited at every stage. Alpine tribes charged tolls for safe passage, sometimes in coin, often in kind. One contract from Rhaetia specifies paying local guides with iron tools rather than money. Warehouses near major passes made fortunes storing goods until better weather arrived. The town of Valdadina grew rich simply because it sat where the Brenner descent leveled out. Every cart stopping to check brakes became a potential customer. Transport costs often exceeded goods value. An amphora of cheap wine might cost more to ship across the Alps than to produce. The solution? Blend economics. Caravans carried high-value luxury items to justify the trip and filled remaining space with bulk goods like wool or grain. Military shipments took priority when space was scarce. A trader's lead ingots got bumped if the army needed to move siege engines. Cultural baggage traveled free. Pottery shards found along the routes mix Roman designs with Celtic patterns. A soldier's letter home might include local alpine remedies for frostbite. Even religions blended. Altars near the great St. Bernard Pass show dedications to both Jupiter and local mountain spirits. The slow march of goods became a conveyor, belt for ideas. The economics worked because everyone adapted. Roman roads had gentle grades, not just for carts, but to reduce wear on expensive draft animals. Merchants calculated that losing one mule to a broken leg could erase profits from 3 successful trips. Even slaves handling goods gained specialized knowledge sown. Dealers preferred Gallic slaves for alpine routes because they understood snow conditions better. Bandits haunted predictable spots. Narrow passes forced caravans into single file, creating perfect ambush points. Guard pay records show seasonal spikes, more escorts hired when autumn storms made travelers desperate to push through. One tactic involved merchants delaying trips until large groups formed naturally. Safety lay in numbers moving slowly together. Tax collectors set up offices where routes bottlenecked. The Quadragesima Galliarum, a 2.5% tariff on all goods entering. Gall was collected at alpine passes. Excavated tablets from customs houses list everything from elephant tusks to German amber. One bored clerk even tallied the number of nails in passing wagon wheels, probably checking for undeclared repairs that might indicate smuggling. Local economies grew around the crawl. Towns near way stations mass-produced items travelers constantly needed. Replacement wagon axles, snow goggles made from smoky quartz, even pre-packaged medical kits with alpine herbs. The village of Endiday became famous for its durable goat-hide boots, essential for anyone spending weeks walking wet mountain roads. Some goods moved indirectly. Timber from the Alps often went downstream on rafts, then returned as finished. Lumber after artisans near Rome worked it. Olive oil might make 3 separate alpine crossings, first as raw fruit, then as pressed oil, finally as empty amphorae sent back for reuse. The true measure of trade wasn't distance, but how many profitable cycles an item could complete. Military needs reshaped commercial routes. When Augustus campaigned in Germania, suddenly the Brenner Pass saw endless shipments of prefabricated fort parts, each wooden beam numbered for quick assembly. Peacetime allowed more flexibility. A merchant could choose between passes based on weather and toll costs rather than army priorities. The real beneficiaries weren't emperors, but ordinary people. Alpine traders built networks stretching from Britain to Egypt without ever leaving their mountain valleys. They knew which Syrian merchants paid best for Noric iron, which Gaulish tribes would exchange amber for salt. Their wealth came from information as much as goods, a web of knowledge passed through generations. What's striking, isn't the volume traded, but its constancy? Day after day, year after year, the same types of goods moved at the same glacial pace. A bronze scale found near the Septimer Pass still has weights calibrated to Roman pounds proof that standard measures mattered more than speed. The system's fragility became clear during crisis. When barbarian raids spiked in the 3rd century, some passes saw trade drop by 80%. Yet the routes never fully died because the incentives remained. Even at Rome's fall, Alpine traders still moved goods just now for new masters. The slow roads outlasted empires by serving whoever needed them. Next time you see an Alpine valley, imagine it full of parked carts waiting out a storm. The Romans didn't conquer these mountains, they waited them out. And in that patience built trade networks so resilient, they're still echoed in modern European highways. Now consider how this slow-moving system handled something even more demanding than silk or silver. Moving an army through the Alps wasn't about speed, it was about survival. A single legion with its baggage train stretched nearly 2 miles long, turning mountain passes into human snakes that took hours to pass any given point. The vanguard would reach the next campsite before the rear guard finished packing up. Every step had to be synchronized, because in the mountains, haste killed more soldiers than enemy swords ever could. Supply chains dictated everything. A legion of 5,000 men required 11 tons of grain per day, enough to fill 40 mule wagons. That's not counting fodder for cavalry horses, spare weapons, or medical supplies. Alpine campaigns needed twice the normal provisions, since cold weather earned extra calories. One quartermaster's tablet from the Rhaetian frontier lists emergency rations of lard and hardtack, noting they'd last 8 days if no wagons are lost. The implied threat was clear. Routes were chosen for reliability, not shortcuts. When Drusus campaigned in 15 BCE, he avoided Hannibal's famous path in favor of the Brenner Pass, wider, gentler, and already dotted with Roman supply depots. His army moved at under 10 miles a day, stopping every afternoon to fortify camps. That slow pace meant Germanic tribes had weeks of warning, but it also ensured the legions arrived intact and well-fed. Weather windows were non-negotiable. Military calendars marked Alpine crossings between June and September only. Even then, afternoon storms could halt progress. A 1st-century dispatch describes lightning striking a baggage train near the Julier Pass, killing 17 mules instantly. After that, officers ordered all metal armor wrapped in cloth when clouds gathered. Frontier units specialized in Alpine warfare. The Rhaetian cohorts recruited tall, broad-shouldered men from mountainous regions. Their gear differed too shorter. Javelins for throwing uphill, wool cloaks with hoods, even crampons made from iron spikes lashed to boots. These weren't parade ground soldiers, but pragmatists who knew surviving the pass mattered more than looking heroic. Road maintenance became military discipline. Legionaries assigned to Alpine duty spent as much time shoveling snow as drilling with swords. Standard operating procedure required clearing 1 mile ahead each morning before the main column moved. Soldiers complained endlessly in letters home about playing farmer with endless rock hauling and ditch digging. Medical care adapted to the environment. Field hospitals near passes kept stocks of wound dressings soaked in vinegar. Acidity prevented infection better than fresh water. Frostbite treatment involved gradual rewarming with lukewarm compresses, a technique borrowed from Alpine tribes. The worst cases got sent downhill to valleys where warm springs could aid recovery. Night marshes happened only under desperation. During the Marcomannic Wars, Marcus Aurelius ordered a winter crossing to surprise Germanic tribes. Eyewitness accounts described soldiers freezing to death standing up, their corpses remaining upright in the snow until spring thaw. Those who survived burned wagon parts for warmth, rendering the supply train useless. The victory that followed was hollow, the army too weakened to capitalize. Scouts were worth their weight in gold. Reconnaissance parties moved weeks ahead, verifying routes and marking avalanche zones with red-painted posts. Some carried alpine horns to signaling across valleys' early warning systems against ambushes. Their reports determined entire campaign. Timelines. One scout's pay stub shows a 50% hazard bonus, more than centurions earned. Pioneer units built as they went. Before major crossings, engineers would reinforce bridges with extra crossbeams capable of holding siege engines. Temporary causeways made of bundled branches helped cross soggy meadows without losing wagons to mud. At steep sections, teams installed winches to haul equipment uphill in stages. None of this was permanent, just enough to get the army through. Safely, local guides received military ranks. Alpine tribesmen enlisted as speculators, scouts, with full pay and privileges. Their knowledge outweighed any loyalty concerns. They knew which passes stayed snow-free longest, where marmot dens might collapse under marching feet, even which berries were safe to eat when rations ran low. Some retired with Roman citizenship. After 20 years' service, pack animals outnumbered soldiers. A typical Alpine legion brought 1 mule per 3 men, plus ox-drawn wagons for siege equipment. Veterinary care became crucial. Herdsmen walked alongside applying pine tar to prevent hoof cracking on icy trails. Loss rates were brutal. Quartermaster logs from 107 CE show 40% of mules needing replacement after one crossing. Fortified stops appeared at precise intervals. Every 12 miles, the Legion's standard day's march, the army would reach a pre-built station with palisades, fresh water, and storage pits. These weren't comforts, but necessities. Arriving after dark without shelter in high passes meant death from exposure. Archaeologists find hundreds of hobnails from boots near these sites, soldiers repairing footwear by firelight. Column discipline meant life or death. Rules were merciless. Stragglers who fell behind got left if they couldn't keep up. Cooking fires were forbidden until the entire train arrived, ensuring no one diverted energy to meals before securing. The perimeter. Night watches rotated in shorter shifts to combat altitude-induced drowsiness. Artillery moved disassembled. Ballistae and onagers traveled in pieces across 15 mules, with instruction manuals carved onto wooden tablets. Final assembly happened only before battle, attempting to drag a fully constructed siege. Engine through switchbacks was suicide. Range calculations even accounted for uphill shots, with crews adding extra torsion for elevation changes. Winter. Preparation started in summer. Alpine units spent July and August stockpiling hay in valley barns along projected routes. By September, they'd moved reserves upslope to intermediate caches. If war came in spring, they'd retrace steps, burning these provisions first rather than hauling fresh ones from below. Failure taught hard lessons. When Quintilius Varus lost 3 legions in Germania's Teutoburg forest, subsequent commanders avoided his mistake rushing through hostile territory without securing supply lines. Future Alpine campaigns moved like glaciers, unstoppable because they didn't try to be fast. Trajan's Dacian wars saw forts built every 5 miles along crossed passes, even if construction delayed combat by months. The real test came after the march. Troops arriving in northern Italy needed weeks to recover from altitude effects and malnutrition. Medical logs describe mountain sickness symptoms, headaches, swollen limbs, exhaustion lasting days. Smart generals factored this into plans. Claudius delayed invading Britain until his Alpine veterans had fully recuperated. What looks like sluggishness was strategy. While barbarian warbands dashed through valleys in days, Roman forces took weeks, but arrived ready to fight and stay. The same passes that slowed advance also prevented enemies from outflanking them. By the time opposing tribes realized where the legions were heading, Roman engineers had already fortified the exits. Cultural adaptation happened along the way. Legionaries adopted Alpine snowshoes from captured tribesmen. Mess kits incorporated local designs for hanging over fires without toppling. Even Latin changed soldiers picked up Rhaetian words for avalanche, gumpa, and fogbank, nebula alpina, terms still used today. The personal cost surfaced in bones. Skeletons from Alpine veteran cemeteries show telltale signs. Enlarged right shoulders from years of pushing wagons uphill. Arthritic knees from marching on uneven slopes, even reshaped ear canals from chronic altitude pressure. These men didn't just cross mountains. Their bodies became reflections of the terrain. Perhaps the ultimate testament sits near the Brenner Pass. There, a simple stone marker reads Legio 15 iter per Alpes, the path of the 15th Legion. No boasting about victories or distances covered. Just a quiet acknowledgement of getting through. Because in Alpine warfare, survival was the win. The irony? Those slow, tedious crossings shaped Europe more than any battle ever could. The routes Rome carved for its plodding armies became medieval trade roads, then modern highways. The passes they secured still define national borders today. Fast-moving barbarian raids came and went. Rome's patient footsteps remained. Now consider what else crept through those passes at legionary pace. Not weapons or wheat, but the slow blending of cultures. Ideas traveling so gradually Their spread went unnoticed until it was irreversible, killing 17 mules instantly. After that, officers ordered all metal armor wrapped in cloth when clouds gathered. Frontier units specialized in alpine warfare. The Rhaetian cohorts recruited tall, broad-shouldered men from mountainous regions. Their gear differed too shorter. Javelins for throwing uphill, wool cloaks with hoods, even crampons made from iron spikes lashed to boots. These weren't parade ground soldiers, but pragmatists who knew surviving the pass mattered more than looking heroic. Road maintenance became military discipline. Legionaries assigned to alpine duty spent as much time shoveling snow as drilling with swords. Standard operating procedure required clearing 1 mile ahead each morning before the main column moved. Soldiers complained endlessly in letters home about playing farmer with endless rock hauling and ditch digging. Medical care adapted to the environment. Field hospitals near passes kept stocks of wound dressings soaked in vinegar. Acidity prevented infection better than fresh water. Frostbite treatment involved gradual rewarming with lukewarm compresses, a technique borrowed from alpine tribes. The worst cases got sent downhill to valleys where warm springs could aid recovery. Night marches happened only under desperation. During the Marcomannic Wars, Marcus Aurelius ordered a winter crossing to surprise Germanic tribes. Eyewitness accounts described soldiers freezing to death standing up, their corpses remaining upright in the snow until spring thaw. Those who survived burned wagon parts for warmth, rendering the supply train useless. The victory that followed was hollow, the army too weakened to capitalize. Scouts were worth their weight in gold. Reconnaissance parties moved weeks ahead, verifying routes and marking avalanche zones with red-painted posts. Some carried alpine horns to signaling across valleys' early warning systems against ambushes. Their reports determined entire campaign. Timelines. One scout's pay stub shows a 50% hazard bonus, more than centurions earned. Pioneer units built as they went. Before major crossings, engineers would reinforce bridges with extra crossbeams capable of holding siege engines. Temporary causeways made of bundled branches helped cross soggy meadows without losing wagons to mud. At steep sections, teams installed winches to haul equipment uphill in stages. None of this was permanent, just enough to get the army through. Safely, local guides received military ranks. Alpine tribesmen enlisted as speculators, scouts, with full pay and privileges. Their knowledge outweighed any loyalty concerns. They knew which passes stayed snow-free longest, where marmot dens might collapse under marching feet, even which berries were safe to eat when rations ran low. Some retired with Roman citizenship. After 20 years' service, pack animals outnumbered soldiers. A typical Alpine legion brought 1 mule per 3 men, plus ox-drawn wagons for siege equipment. Veterinary care became crucial. Herdsmen walked alongside applying pine tar to prevent hoof cracking on icy trails. Loss rates were brutal. Quartermaster logs from 107 CE show 40% of mules needing replacement after one crossing. Fortified stops appeared at precise intervals. Every 12 miles, the Legion's standard day's march, the army would reach a pre-built station with palisades. fresh water, and storage pits. These weren't comforts, but necessities. Arriving after dark without shelter in high passes meant death from exposure. Archaeologists find hundreds of hobnails from boots near these sites, soldiers repairing footwear by firelight. Column discipline meant life or death. Rules were merciless. Stragglers who fell behind got left if they couldn't keep up. Cooking fires were forbidden until the entire train arrived, ensuring no one diverted energy to meals before securing the perimeter. Night watches rotated in shorter shifts to combat altitude-induced drowsiness. Artillery moved disassembled. Ballistae and onagers traveled in pieces across 15 mules, with instruction manuals carved onto wooden tablets. Final assembly happened only before battle, attempting to drag a fully constructed siege. Engine through switchbacks was suicide. Range calculations even accounted for uphill shots, with crews adding extra torsion for elevation changes. Winter. Preparation started in summer. Alpine units spent July and August stockpiling hay in valley barns along projected routes. By September, they'd moved reserves upslope to intermediate caches. If war came in spring, they'd retrace steps, burning these provisions first rather than hauling fresh ones from below. Failure taught hard lessons. When Quintilius Varus lost 3 legions in Germania's Teutoburg forest, subsequent commanders avoided his mistake rushing through hostile territory without securing supply lines. Future Alpine campaigns moved like glaciers, unstoppable because they didn't try to be fast. Trajan's Dacian wars saw forts built every 5 miles along crossed passes, even if construction delayed combat by months. The real test came after the march. Troops arriving in northern Italy needed weeks to recover from altitude effects and malnutrition. Medical logs describe mountain sickness symptoms, headaches, swollen limbs, exhaustion lasting days. Smart generals factored this into plans. Claudius delayed invading Britain until his Alpine veterans had fully recuperated. What looks like sluggishness was strategy. While barbarian warbands dashed through valleys in days, Roman forces took weeks, but arrived ready to fight and stay. The same passes that slowed advance also prevented enemies from outflanking them. By the time opposing tribes realized where the legions were heading, Roman engineers had already fortified the exits. Cultural adaptation happened along the way. Legionaries adopted Alpine snowshoes from captured tribesmen. Mess kits incorporated local designs for hanging over fires without toppling. Even Latin changed soldiers picked up Rhaetian words for avalanche, gumpa, and fogbank nebula alpina, terms still used today. The personal cost surfaced in bones. Skeletons from Alpine veteran cemeteries show telltale signs. Enlarged right shoulders from years of pushing wagons uphill. Arthritic knees from marching on uneven slopes, even reshaped ear canals from chronic altitude pressure. These men didn't just cross mountains. Their bodies became reflections of the terrain. Perhaps the ultimate testament sits near the Brenner Pass. There, a simple stone marker reads Legio 15 iter per Alpes, the path of the 15th Legion. No boasting about victories or distances covered. Just a quiet acknowledgement of getting through, because in Alpine warfare, survival was the win. The irony? Those slow, tedious crossings shaped Europe more than any battle ever could. The routes Rome carved for its plodding armies became medieval trade roads, then modern highways. The passes they secured still define national borders today. Fast-moving barbarian raids came and went. Rome's patient footsteps remained. Now consider what else crept through those passes at legionary pace. Not weapons or wheat, but the slow blending of cultures. Ideas traveling so gradually, their spread went unnoticed until it was irreversible. The Alpine passes didn't just move goods, they filtered cultures through stone. Picture a Rhaetian merchant learning Latin not from books, but from listening to soldiers gripe about mountain weather around way station fires. The language changed. Along the routes, picking up local words for avalanche paths, gumpa, and fog banks choked with pine scent, nebula alpina. Even proper Latin bent to Alpine reality. A first-century grammarian complained about frontier dialects where every other word sounds Celtic, forgetting that's exactly how languages grow. Religions blended as slowly as wine mixed with water. Jupiter got Alpine makeovers, his statues sometimes wearing local wool cloaks instead of togas. Small roadside shrines appeared where travelers left offerings to both Roman lares and mountain spirits in the same breath. Archaeologists find altars dedicating to the genius of this pass, alongside standard imperial cult inscriptions. A goddess Diana merged effortlessly with Alpine huntress deities. Their shrines always positioned at hunting trail junctions. Artisans borrowed without asking. Celtic scrollwork twisted into Roman frescoes at way stations. Local potters started adding laurel wreath designs to their traditional zigzag patterns, not because anyone ordered it, but because passing merchants paid more for Roman-looking bowls. A cooking pot dug up near the Brenner Pass shows this perfectly. Its shape is pure Rhaetian, but someone scratched "Property of Legio 21" in uneven Latin letters on the bottom. The army became an accidental culture machine. Legionaries from Syria brought dice games that Alpine kids copied using carved bone scraps. Recipes traveled to garrison kitchen waste pits reveal sudden appearances of Mediterranean spices like silphium alongside local wild garlic. Soldiers retiring near passes often married into local families, creating households that spoke hybrid dialects and celebrated both Saturnalia and Alpine solstice rites. Merents turned into reluctant teachers. A Carthaginian silk trader might explain double-entry bookkeeping to a Helvetii middleman in broken Latin and hand gestures. Alpine cheesemakers learned to stamp their products with Roman-style producer marks after seeing how it increased prices south of the mountains. Even units of measurement blurred. Excavated weighing scales often have one side calibrated to Roman pounds, the other to local handful standards. Christianity crept through like morning fog. Early converts among soldiers and merchants carried small crosses packed alongside trade goods. But the real spread happened at rest stops, where travelers argued theology to pass time. One graffiti near the Septimer Pass quotes John 3:16 alongside crude drawings of Alpine ibex, some evangelist. adapting the message to his audience. By the 4th century, waystation stables doubled as secret churches, their mangers repurposed as altars. Military forts became cultural petri dishes. At Vindonissa, near the Goddard Pass, excavations found Egyptian scarabs, British hunting knives, and Gaulish horse gear all in one barracks room. The garbage heaps tell the real story. Olive pits from Spain mixed with cherry stones from local valleys. Byzantine ceramic shards layered under Celtic-style brooches. Every object marks a slow negotiation between Romang and local. Building styles hybridized. Alpine dry stone retaining walls suddenly appeared reinforced with Roman concrete at stress points. Local thatching techniques got applied to military barracks roofs after soldiers realized they shed snow better. Even city layouts adapted. The town of Brigantium kept its winding Celtic alleys, but added a Roman-style form right where the trade routes converged. Clothing swapped features. Legionnaires adopted fur-lined hoods from Alpine tribes, while local elites started wearing Roman-style clasps on their traditional wool robes. One preserved boot from the Loibel Pass combines Mediterranean leatherworking with the local practice of stuffing saws with dried moss for insulation. Fashion moved at the speed of ox carts. The slowest cross-pollination happened in kitchens. Roman garum sauce appeared in Alpine valleys, but thinned with local goat milk to blunt its fishy intensity. Alpine berry preserves started showing up in legionary rations, packed in traditional birch bark containers that happened to resist mold. At some point, someone realized that layering local cheese with imported olive oil created a travel snack. That lasted weeks. The original Alpine grilled cheese was born from logistical necessity. Music blended unpredictably. Roman tubas and Alpine horns ended up playing the same military calls at garrisons near passes. A carved stone at Augusta Praetoria shows a scene that shouldn't make sense. Musicians performing with Roman lyres alongside curved Celtic horns. Yet there they are, frozen in stone like it was the most natural combo in the world. Politics seeped both ways. Local chieftains began copying Romang, administrative turns even before conquest, calling their meetings senates and borrowing Latin words for taxes. Meanwhile, Roman governors learned to work through Alpine clan structures rather than against them. Letters from frontier officials show endless gripes about having to negotiate with 10 different mountain uncles just to repair a road segment. Medicine exchanged hands quietly. Roman army doctors adopted Alpine frostbite remedies involving packed snow, contrary to Mediterranean warm water traditions. Local midwives started using Roman-style birthing stools after seeing them at military hospitals. The most telling evidence comes from medical kits typical Roman bronze scalpels, found alongside pouches of Alpine willow bark powder, the original aspirin. Timekeeping got creative. Alpine daylight hours varied wildly by season, so communities near passes developed hybrid calendars. One farmer's almanac scratched on a wooden tablet divides the year into Roman months, but marks planting dates by Celtic tree lore. Official military documents stuck to imperial time, but private letters often referenced both. We'll meet after the calends, when the larch needles fall. Marriage customs crossed borders. Roman soldiers frequently took local wives, but the weddings borrowed freely from both traditions. One 2nd century epitaph near the Brenner describes a woman as Flavia, daughter of Brennus, with equal pride in both names. Dowry lists from these unions mix Roman copper coins with Alpine measures of salt currency for two different worlds colliding. Education happened organically. Wealthy Alpine families started hiring retired legionaries as tutors, wanting their children to learn Latin arithmetic. But the lessons went both ways. Those same soldiers often picked up local tracking skills and weather lore. Wax tablets from a Rhaetian schoolhouse show Latin. Verbs practiced alongside Celtic animal symbols used for mountain navigation. Even humor merged. Graffiti at way stations includes Latin puns that only work when pronounced with a Celtic accent. One joke scratched near a latrine reads, Quintus says, "Why did the Gaul cross the road?" To get to the other side eventually. It's not just bilingual, it's bicultural teasing at its finest. The most profound changes left no written record. Somewhere along these passes, Alpine herders stopped seeing eagles as just birds and started associating them with Jupiters. Symbols. Roman tax collectors learned that threatening Alpine folk with fines worked less well than joking about their goats during negotiations. These weren't laws or treaties, just people adapting daily until the adaptations became culture itself. Resistance persisted in quiet ways. Some Alpine families buried their dead with traditional amber beads hidden under Roman-style shrouds. Certain valleys maintained outlawed Celtic moon rituals by labeling them birthday parties for Diana. One cave near the Septimer Pass contains a stunning find, a Roman military cloak carefully folded around a pre-Roman tribal mask, as if someone couldn't choose. The ultimate evidence hides in modern place names. Bellinzona blends Latin, bellum, war, with Celtic dunum, fort. Martini merges the god Mars with the Gallic suffix meaning place of. Even Switzerland's Latin name, Confederatio Helvetica, carries traces of both the Roman Confederation and the local Helvetii tribe. The Alps remember what emperors forgot, that culture isn't imposed, it accumulates. Legacies aren't always monumental. They live in things like a farmer near Bolzano, who still plants by phases of the moon his Roman Celtic ancestors tracked, or Swiss-German dialects that use Latin legal terms grafted onto older grammar. Even the Vatican's Swiss Guard uniforms echo Alpine colors chosen centuries ago because they showed up well against mountain snow. None of this happened fast. The blurring took generations of shared hardship on those winding roads. A Romang might spend his entire career marching the Brenner Pass and never realize he was part of the mix, just another traveler adding his footnotes to an Alpine manuscript written in stone and weather. That manuscript's final lesson? True integration moves at the speed of trust. Not the flashy pace of conquest, but the glacial creep of countless small choices. When to share a fire, when to laugh at a joke in an unfamiliar language, when to borrow someone else's solution because the mountain doesn't care whose idea it was. Now consider what all this patience ultimately built, Not just blended cultures, but a stubborn resilience that outlasted Rome itself. The Romang Alpine passes weren't just roads. They were lessons in why sometimes slow works better than fast. While modern highways blast tunnels straight through mountains, the old Roman routes still cling to the surface, following contours engineers mapped 2,000 years ago. The original pavement stones and the Via Claudia Augusta have outlasted a dozen layers of modern asphalt laid above them. There's a reason for that. Modern logistics experts would shudder at Romang Alpine timelines. A shipment that takes 3 hours today required 3 weeks back then. Yet those plodding caravans built trade networks that shaped Europe more permanently than any express delivery ever could. The Roman approach was simple: build for the terrain, not the timetable. Some sections of the Brenner Pass route still guide traffic today, not as museum pieces, but as functional roads. That's the power of working with a landscape rather than fighting it. The contrast with modern thinking couldn't be sharper. Today's supply chains prize just-in-time delivery. Rome prized just in case. Way stations stocked spare wheels extra. Mules, emergency rations. All the things that let travelers wait out storms without starving. A merchant account tablet from Veldadina lists enough spare axle parts to rebuild every cart in the convoy twice over. This wasn't inefficiency. Was respect for mountains that don't care about quarterly profits. The tracks Rome cut became the blueprint for medieval Europe. Charlemagne marched his armies along Roman-aligned routes when expanding his empire. Medieval pilgrims followed the same paths to Rome that Roman soldiers had walked toward Germania. Even Napoleon's engineers, when planning their Alpine crossings, started by studying old Roman roadbeds. The real legacy wasn't individual stones, but the strategic logic beneath them, the understanding that reliable beats fast every time. Modern Alpine infrastructure still leans on Roman choices. The Gotthard-based tunnel, Switzerland's high-speed rail marvel, follows almost exactly the same entry and exit points the Romans established for their surface road. Transportation planners didn't do this for historical accuracy. They did it because the Romans had already solved the puzzle of where a north-south route made geographic sense. Sometimes 2,000 years of technological progress just confirms ancient logic. There's a reason Alpine Valley communities still cluster where Roman way stations stood. These weren't random camping spots. They marked the precise distance tired travelers could cover in a day. Modern service plazas on the Brenner Highway appear at eerily similar intervals. The difference? Today's drivers stop for coffee and restroom. Breaks where Roman mule teams stopped because human and animal endurance fundamentals haven't changed much. The military lessons remain relevant too. Roman generals accepted that Alpine campaigns needed triple the planning time of lowland warfare. Their solution? Detailed reconnaissance and phased logistics concepts still taught at West Point and Sandhurst. When NATO conducted mountain warfare exercises near the Brenner Pass in 2022, their supply timelines strangely mirrored those of Augustus' legions. Some environments simply dictate their own pace. Modern warehouse logistics could learn from Alpine. Way stations. The Roman system of storing goods at predictable intervals along the route, directly inspired today's distribution center networks. Amazon's fulfillment model isn't so different from how olive oil amphory leapfrogged from one Mancio to the next, except modern algorithms have replaced the guy shouting at mule drivers. The environmental adaptation was masterful. Roman roads didn't fight avalanches. They redirected them with carefully angled retaining walls that functioned better than many modern barriers. Their drainage systems still outperform some contemporary highway ditches. At the Muragal Pass in Switzerland, a Romang viaduct survived intact until 2019. Floods not bad for a structure built when Britain was still tribal. Cultural patience created lasting bonds. Roman soldiers stationed in alpine valleys often married into local families, blending Latin grammar with Rhetoric vocabulary. Today, Swiss-German dialects still use Latin legal terms grafted onto Celtic sentence structures. This wasn't forced assimilation. It was the natural result of people solving shared problems over generations. Economic patterns fossilized Roman decisions. The Brenner Pass still handles most north-south freight between Italy and Germany because Roman engineers chose the most sustainable route, not the shortest. Modern trucking companies might spend millions on fuel-saving technologies, yet the basic geography Rome mapped determines their profit margins. The Tabula Peutingeria, that ancient Roman road map, shows its genius in hindsight. At first glance, it looks distorted because it prioritizes travel connections over geographic accuracy. A modern subway map works the same way. When 18th century traders revived Roman pass routes, they essentially brought this schematic thinking back to life. Food logistics followed similar principles. Alpine cheese and hardtack became staples not because they tasted great, but because they survived journeys that spoiled fresher foods. Today's energy bars and MREs solve the same problem with slightly better flavors. The Roman innovation was recognizing that durability mattered more than variety, a lesson space agencies rediscovered when planning astronaut meals. Medical adaptations were ahead of their time. Roman medics learned frostbite treatment from alpine tribes, slow rewarming with snow rather than sudden heat. Modern emergency protocols still recommend this for severe frostbite. Even their mountain sickness observations match current altitude illness research proof that patient observation beats rushed conclusions. Communication systems set lasting templates. The Roman postal service switching horses at relay stations wasn't so different from modern data packets hopping between cell towers. Their Alpine courier network moved information faster than goods, just like today's fiber optic cables, paralleling slow truck routes through tunnels. The ratio might surprise you. An imperial courier covered about 50 miles a day, not much slower than a bicycle courier in modern Manhattan traffic. The resistance to winter travel reveals deep wisdom. Roman military records show alpine passes strictly closed from October to May, not from lack of technology, but from hard experience. Modern highway departments spend millions fighting winter, conditions that the Romans simply avoided. Sometimes the smartest engineering solution is knowing when to stay home. Local collaboration models were revolutionary. Rather than conquering Alpine tribes, Rome hired them as expert consultants. The Bruni people went from being road bandits to paid guides within a generation. Modern conflict resolution experts call this stakeholder integration. The Romans just called it common sense. The real takeaway isn't about ancient history. It's about how we approach obstacles today. Rome thrived in the Alps because they accepted constraints that other empires tried to bulldoze through. When modern projects fail, whether stalled infrastructure or rushed software releases, it's often because we prioritized speed over understanding. Those Alpine passes whisper a simple truth. The fastest way forward isn't always straight through. Sometimes the longest-lasting solutions come from working with the grain of the world, not against it. Next time your GPS suggests a shortcut through mountain roads, consider taking the Roman route, instead the one that curves gently along rivers instead of tunneling straight ahead. Your suspension might thank you. Now imagine those same Romains. Engineers watching a modern highway crew patch potholes for the third time in a year. They'd probably shake their heads and mutter something about proper foundation layers, then go check their own 2,000-year-old pavement, still holding steady under the snow. The Alps never bowed to Rome's deadlines. Those mountains taught the empire a brutal lesson. Some journeys can't be rushed. Those patient roads built connections that outlived emperors, while the hasty paths collapsed under snow. Next time you're stuck in traffic or waiting for a delayed package, think like a Roman quartermaster. They'd tell you reliability beats speed every time. The goods always arrived because no one pretended avalanches cared about schedules. Modern efficiency could learn from those Alpine rhythms. Zoom out far enough and you'll see it our highways. Still follow routes mapped by men who understood the power of going slow to last long. The real monuments weren't the roads, but the patience that built them.